Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, and former UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory. So he joins us now from here in Turkey, in Bodrum. Welcome, Richard. So only recently we saw the UNHRC slammed very dramatically by the U.S., which of course ended up leaving it, and by Israel. The Trump administration, which was so tightly aligned with Israel's stance, would have the world believe that the HRC doesn't really matter in the world. Its decisions don't amount to much. So in today's world, that question is out there. What the UNHRC does it have a place? Does it make a difference?
Yes, in my view, it's very important, not because it will immediately change Israel's behavior or the United States' effort to shield Israel from international responses of this kind. But what will make a difference is the degree to which global solidarity efforts will be encouraged by such initiatives of the Human Rights Council, because the UN is very important in the symbolic domain of politics in establishing the legitimacy of grievances. And this action by the Human Rights Council to some extent offsets the geopolitical manipulation that has kept Israel from adhering to international humanitarian law in its administration of the occupied Palestinian territories.
So now we see the Biden administration coming back to the HRC only as an observer for now, but to see a resolution like this come across using that strong language that we talked about, is that only going to have a kind of equal and opposite reaction? Is it going to intensify those voices that have long accused the HRC of unduly criticizing Israel?
Well, it will be argued in that way, but any kind of objective inquiry will vindicate the Human Rights Council if you examine its actions in light of two things. One is its consistent failure to uphold its obligations as the occupying power that is set forth in the Geneva Conventions and in international humanitarian law. And the second thing is the degree to which the UN has a special responsibility for Palestine and to the Palestinian people, because it undertook, as it has for no other area in the world, responsibility for working out a solution that would be fair to the Jewish immigrants and to the Palestinian residents. And it's never been able to fulfill that fundamental responsibility.
The cycle tends to be the same, as you know, over and over again. Israel blames Hamas for firing rockets. Israel responds with even greater force, and on we go. So do you feel like there's a sense in the world now that it has had enough of seeing this same old cycle and seeing the conditions that Palestinians still live under?
Well, I think that's to some extent true, and that there may be a turning of the tide. The tide may be turning in the Palestinian favor. And one of the things that one needs to pay more attention to is what I call the politics of decontextualization. For instance, the rockets didn't fly out of nowhere. They were responses to the Israeli provocations by evicting Palestinian families from Sheikh Jarrah, the Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, by right-wing settler demonstrations that were very provocative in Palestinian neighborhoods of Jerusalem, and by the invasion of Al-Aqsa Mosque and compound at the height of Ramadan, which was blatant interference with the worship of Muslims within. And this was all done in a context where Netanyahu was in a very weak position internally and had a sense that, as before, his political prospects improve if he can manufacture a political crisis. So I think there's no doubt in my mind that Israel provoked this rocket attack and used it as a pretext for a disproportionate, devastating response once more on the beleaguered and illegally blockaded people of Gaza.
What is the strongest evidence you would say that you've seen that it's getting tougher for Israel to justify the kinds of casualties that we've been seeing there?
Well, I think the treatment in the United States, for instance, by the mainstream media, the New York Times has never been as open to objective reporting on the civilian damage done by Israel and by the degree to which the lives of the Palestinian people are incompatible with the obligations of Israel as the occupying power. And one should remember that Israel had a special obligation in the midst of this humanitarian crisis that's been intensified by COVID. Article 55 of the Fourth Geneva Convention places a special burden on the occupying power to take all measures possible for the protection of the civilian population in a time of contagious disease or epidemic or pandemic.
Richard, thanks so much for being with us.